What's up, everybody? It's Alex from Heavy New York, and on the phone we got the one and only Don Jamieson. Thank you so much for your time, man. Really appreciate it.
Hey, it's good to be with you today, man. You're such a great supporter. I always see you out on the scene, man. You're the real deal, so good to be here with you.
Thank you, man. I try my best. So I was just listening to Denim and Laughter, actually, before I called you at work, and I was losing my shit. Like, my coworker's like, what the hell's your problem? It's true. What I was always curious about is with your comedy skits, and when you're on that stage, are you actually improvising, or do you plan any of the subject matters that you're talking about in advance or something like that?
Yeah, man, for any comedy, you work the bits out, and they definitely have a certain wording, they definitely have a certain rhythm, but I also like for the unexpected to happen as well. So, some of the jokes on this album were jokes that I kind of just improv'd, along the way, and they just became part of the act. So I like to keep it loose. There's a joke about Winger on the album, and that one I completely ad-libbed when I was on stage because I knew Kip Winger was in the room. I was on the Monsters of Rock cruise and I was performing, and he happened to be in there, and I wanted to break his balls a little, and I just came up with it off the top of my head, and it became one of my favorite jokes, and boom, now it's on the album.
Yeah, and I remember when you were at the Anvil show, I could have sworn that there was a couple. I thought it was actually recorded. Was it recorded from that, where you were talking about like Blue Moon and saying how Budweiser is like the way to go?
Oh, right. Well, all the hipster beers and stuff. Yeah, I got that little rant going on. But no, I mean this whole album was actually recorded in a speakeasy in Los Angeles, a literal illegal club, from the late 20s when Prohibition was around, and you used to have to find these secret locations where you could go drink, and I found a place like that for real, and it's like 40 of hardcore fans of mine, and it's comedy is dangerous enough as it is, but when you're under the threat of being raided, it makes it even more dangerous.
That would definitely be an interesting article to wake up to the next morning. And
yeah.
May I just say thank you for calling out those hipster beers. I've tried them. That stuff is liquid yeast infection, I gotta say. But what I find unique is listening to this album, it was actually really enjoyable to listen to. But obviously, watching comedy live is obviously a completely different scenario with crowd interaction and everything like that. And I ask a lot of bands this too, but when you are performing live versus a comedy, it almost seems like all bets are off, right? Like any notion of what you had going into it, I'd imagine that sometimes some stuff you practice kind of goes out the window, right? Depending on the crowd you're in front of.
Yeah, I mean, I like a band, I kind of have a set list in my mind of what I want to do. But to be honest, when I first started, I would panic if I went off course. Now I get upset if I go in the order that I wanted it to. I love when it goes off the rails, because that's where you're really alive. That's where when you see a band and you see them just start to improv, like in the middle of a song, and you could just tell they're just in the moment. That's the same thing in comedy. When you go off the rails, when you're off your set list and you're just in no man's land and you gotta create on the spot, that's really is the greatest. But when it comes down to the actual jokes, they really are like word for word. That's how you kind of got to do them. That's sort of the science of doing it. But like I said, I keep things a little loose.
Yeah. Do you look for inspiration on the subject matters you want to talk about, or do you sometimes just come up with an idea out of nowhere?
Well, kind of the theme of this album is just, this PC world that we live in. And, I kind of, make the connection with the entire crowd through, the lens of, different rock bands and through different situations and through our language and stuff, and just how over the top PC that we've gotten. But I also don't want to be the 70-year-old man on stage scolding the audience, you know what I mean? So it's a fine line between, being, the get off my lawn guy, and also sort of, making your point and putting people at ease at the same time. Because let's face it, people are triggered at everything you say these days. So I like to put that out in the open, get it out there, let everybody realize, okay, this is cool, we're all adults here, we can handle this stuff, and then we can relax and have fun from there.
Of course. And, I almost feel like every comedian, especially comedians in the realm of metal, whether it's you or Jim Florentine or Craig Gass or somebody like that, all have their like own identity. Like when you go on stage, do you almost kind of like get into like a certain character mode, or are we seeing the just Don Jamieson who he is off stage as we are on stage?
Yeah, it's me, but exaggerated. Definitely, I'm definitely way more high energy when I get on stage. Some of that's anxiousness, and some of that's just like passion. When I'm really passionate about something, it's the volume level goes up, and I've blown out a few comedy club mics over the years. So when I really start to get into it, and I'm starting to have fun with the crowd, they work me up. So it's again same as a band. The more energy I'm getting, the more I put back out there.
Yeah, of course. And we talked about a little bit about this before, but like I almost feel like going back to like, everybody being triggered by everything. I feel like you kind of maybe do that to like, metal elitists too in a way because, I'm sure we've all heard before, you're not a real metalhead if you laugh or you smile or something like that. I'm just curious how you came up with the idea of bridging like two forms of entertainment that people may think don't go together into one.
Well, I say it on the album. I look at how funny most hard rock and metal musicians are. I mean, Alice Cooper, every interview you see with him, he always has this amazing story. You've never heard the same story twice. He always has a brilliant, funny, like punchline at the end to cap the story. So he's like, one of the great storyteller kind of comedians. I say on the album, he's the Bill Cosby of metal, except without the bad sweaters and the roofies.
That is true.
Ozzy. Look at Ozzy. Still to this day is the king of one-liners. He's the Rodney Dangerfield of metal, or the Mitch Hedberg of metal for people 40 and under. But Pete Steele from Typo Negative. Just always that he was so self-deprecating. He was
all four of those guys.
Yeah, so, David Lee Roth, every interview you see with him, you have no idea what he's talking about, but you're cracking up laughing because he's having so much fun and he's so funny. So just as much as I got stuff from comics, I got a lot of my humor from metal musicians. They go hand in hand.
Yeah, definitely. And I almost feel like, when I watch you on stage, I've seen you perform countless times at this point, and like it almost feels like I get for me, personally, I get like a similar fulfillment when I'm watching a band play on stage. I'd imagine that there's maybe like a similar art to performing, right?
Yeah, look, when you open for a rock band, and there's only a handful of us that do it, it's definitely a different mindset. You really got to come out and attack, strong, and sort of, really keep the pace going. There's no time for ballads in my set. Every song has to be a crusher. And then it's funny when I go back to doing comedy clubs, I sort of have to remind myself, like, okay, Don, now relax, take a breath. These are nice people. They've had a reasonable amount of drinks. They're here to see comedy. It's not a rock crowd. You don't have to sort of yell and scream at them. But I love doing both equally. So God bless it. People are still coming out.
Yeah, well, what's funny is because Denim and Leather, it's not Denim and Laughter rather. It's not your only album, obviously, but like you've released countless of other comedy albums. Could these also be representative of who you were at those specific times?
Yeah, all my albums, are a parody of a hard rock or metal album. So, Live and Hilarious was Thin Lizzy Live and Dangerous, and Hellbent for Laughter was Hellbent for Leather by Priest. This is obviously a parody of the Saxon album, Denim and Leather. So, yeah, I love incorporating that packaging into it because for, all my fans from that metal show, that adds an extra layer to the comedy is all the packaging. But I would say this, man, if you just like comedy with a rock attitude, you can still enjoy it even if you don't understand what the packaging means. It's just sort of a bonus for our little exclusive club.
Yeah, of course, because metal goes so far beyond the music now as well. Like, you have the music, but you also have imagery behind it, and then you have comedians such as yourself and Jim Florentine and etc., who I really think show another side of heavy metal, the more humorous side.
Yeah, it was funny, man. I really for a long time didn't talk about rock or metal in my act, and we had Brian Posehn's another guy that does a lot of stuff with bands, and he puts out comedy metal albums as well, and he's super funny. And he did that metal show, and he and I were talking, and he said, it took me a long time before I started talking about this stuff on stage, and it was so weird because that's what comics do. We talk about the things that are a big part of our life. So why aren't we not talking about this music? We talk about our failed relationships, we talk about our failed friendships, we talk about our crazy childhoods, but we don't talk about this music. And when I started doing it on stage more and more, I realized, most people are familiar with these, especially the classic bands. I could talk about Black Sabbath or Twisted Sister or Motley Crue to pretty much any crowd. So I was happy that I really began to embrace that, and then Brian really kind of got my mind straight in that way.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about taking it even further and maybe doing it in front of like the most serious, like do it in front of like a New York City hardcore show or like a black metal show and really see how they're going to take that?
You know what, man? That's a little intense for me, but I'm always up for a challenge. There's actually a guy, Dave Hill.
Oh, I love Dave Hill.
Yeah, Dave Hill. He's a guy that could go up, because he plays guitar also with his comedy. He's a guy that could go up in front of a black metal band and kind of roast those guys and really do a funny job with that genre. That's, I'm more obviously in the classic metal mold. But, when someone presents me, as long as I don't have to burn down a church, I think, I would give it a try.
Yeah, you never know. Maybe that'll be... No, you should do it in a church. Like, have everybody come there thinking it's going to be a black metal show and it's going to go... And then you just show up in, like, corpse paint and then just totally...
Yeah, and do it while the church is burning.
Yeah, just wear a fireproof, thing, please. We need you for the next show. Now, when it comes... I've always said with any art in general, whether it's music, comedy, visual art, whatever, there's also a point of knowing, like, when a skit is, like, done. At what point, when you're on that stage, the audience is laughing and everybody's having a good time, at what point do you know, like, when to end it? Because I feel like, not doing an overkill is also a strategy that you need to master, right?
Yeah, I mean, a bit is done when the album comes out. Really, that's the answer. I mean, you kind of get into the groove of doing a joke a certain way, and you kind of like, okay, yeah, this is pretty much done. But then I'll have like, Florentine and I, when we're going to record an album, we'll have one another come down to a comedy gig, say a month out, and just listen and see if there's anything that seems weird or out of place, or maybe give a punchline to something. And so that really helps. And so now you're a month out from recording, you're still adding stuff to the joke. But yeah, once it's done when the album comes out, and whether or not, there's a couple bits on this album where I'm still kind of exploring it and I'm still expanding on it, but for the most part, the joke's done the way you hear it. That's the joke.
Yeah. What's funny is you see a lot of bands now performing albums in its entirety now. Are you going to memorize, the entire Denim and Laughter, like, album and just try to word for word quote it the whole way?
Well, it's a funny idea for comics to sort of do an anniversary of one of their CDs and see if, because when a band puts out an album, they want to play those songs. When a comedian puts out an album, you don't want to do those jokes anymore. So stuff I did on my 2012 album, like I'd have to go back and relearn all those jokes. I can barely remember any of them. But that's interesting. I don't think any comedian has ever done an anniversary tour of an album. So I'm going to have to talk to Metal Blade about that one.
Yeah, just tell them you got the idea from me, please.
You got it.
Because that would actually be, if you can memorize there's like 13, 14 jokes on this album. If you can memorize all 14 of those word for word, I bow my head. Totally.
Okay, well, it's about 45 minutes of material. So, but it's all stuff that relates to me. So there's a method to the madness in terms of how I remember everything. But it's the uphill climb to start material for the next one and figure out which band's artwork I'm going to steal.
Awesome. And the final question I wanted to ask you is I kind of touched upon it a little bit before, but like I mentioned before, every comedian has like their own identity. To me, there's no comedian out there like Andrew Dice Clay. There's no comedian like Joe Rogan, George Lopez, you, and everything, etc. So, but do you think that there maybe is a universal art to comedy that combines every comedian together, or do you think that it's just everybody has their own strategy and one doesn't relate to the other?
Dude, you gotta just find your own niche. That's the thing. I would have never thought when I started doing comedy 20 plus years ago that I would be on a TV show with two of my best friends. Interviewing all my favorite bands from my childhood, and then sort of incorporating that into what I do on stage. And other guys go on to do Saturday Night Live, or they go on to do Netflix specials, or we all have sort of our niche of where we belong. And if you're a comic and you kind of look at people on stage, other comics, and go, oh, maybe I should be more physical, or maybe I should be louder or more deadpan, you're going to screw everything up. You got to be who you are. And, I think, for me, this album really is who I am. Obviously I talk about rock and metal. I talk about, my relationships. I talk about the PC society that we're in. So, I try to sort of make it as personal to me as possible. If you hear another comedian doing one of these bits, you'll know instantly it's mine. So, I say to comics, just find your lane and stick to it, and you'll find your way, man.
Awesome. Well, Don, before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed this discussion. Is there just anything else that you would like to promote for Denim and Laughter? I think I said Denim and Leather a couple of times, and I do apologize for that. But
yeah, no problem. I'm proud to be associated with the Saxon boys, and appreciate them letting me cop their artwork. And Metal Blade has been such a great label for me to put my comedy albums out on, and thanks to great supporters like yourself and many others, been able to do 4 great stand-up CDs. So really excited to get out on the road and support this thing.
Yeah, any dates announced that you would like to plug? This will be uploaded like right after I hang up, so if it hasn't been announced yet, don't say it here.
Yeah, I'll be on the Monsters of Rock cruise with Eddie and Jim, and people could just find me on the socials for all my tour dates. I'll actually be over in the UK and Europe with Biff from Saxon, who has a solo album out. So this whole thing is tying in very nicely together with Denim and Laughter, and then Biff doing his thing. So we'll see how my jokes do in Germany, France, Belgium, and Sweden.
Yeah.
Hopefully they translate.
Yeah, you, Eddie, and Jim too together. We got the That Metal Show reunion, so you have to do the first skit you guys ever did together in its entirety as well for like the anniversary or something like that. Going back to
hey, listen, I hope and pray 2020 is the year of the rock reunions, and I hope we'll be part of that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Don Jamieson, Denim and Laughter, out now on Metal Blade. Be sure to, or out February 21st on Metal Blade. Be sure to pick that up. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we'll see you next time.